Hello, I'm Cadwyn Morris and I'm here today to talk to you about the season finale of Doctor Who, Hellbent. Now this is a spoiler heavy review, so if you haven't seen the episode I will be talking about story elements that will ruin the episode for you. With that being said, let's talk about the good, let's talk about the bad, the things I liked, the things I didn't. Let's review Doctor Who. So, where to begin? Well, this episode was written by Stephen Moffat, and again I'm going to say the same thing that I've said before many times, that I think he's a good scriptwriter. I just don't think that he's a good showrunner, and this episode proves it, because last week's episode I felt was a real return to form with storytelling, and we've had some really shaky episodes throughout the series and some really bad ones as well. But last week I felt was a real return to form, and this week's episode again I thought was absolutely brilliant. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think it's as strong as last week's, but it's a very different episode. This episode was much more of an adventurous episode as opposed to just this sort of singular story. So let's get right into it. So the opening teaser begins with the Doctor arriving in Nevada, and there's a tiny little diner, and the clue was there from the beginning when you see the diner, because when he walks inside the diner it's bigger on the inside. So yeah, the clue was there from the start. Also, I like the fact that they were playing the Don't Stop Me Now from previous episode of Doctor Who. I think it was Mummy on the Orient Express. I could be wrong, but I think that's where it was. Or was it the Christmas one? I don't know. But anyway, I like the fact that it was playing in the background, and then the Doctor picks up the guitar and starts playing the sort of Clara theme on the guitar. And it didn't hurt the fact that we had Jenna Coleman in a waitress outfit. That didn't bother me in the least. So we get past the title sequence, okay? And we find ourselves on Gallifrey and outside the shack, which obviously popped up in the 50th anniversary episode, and also in the episode Listen as well. So there are two key locations here that have popped up in Doctor Who over the years, and one is the shack and the other one is the diner. So obviously they've played quite a big part in Doctor Who as of late. So I like that. I also like the fact that when the soldiers show up, the Doctor just continually ignores them, because I feel that that's a strong characteristic of the Doctors, is that if you've got a gun, he's just going to ignore you, and he just kept ignoring them until somebody of relevance showed up. And I thought that was pretty good. Also, I liked the Gallifreyan ships. When all those Gallifreyan ships just sort of swarmed in, it was like, those are some really nice ships. I wouldn't mind a model kit of one of those. So yeah, I thought that they were very good. I also like the fact that this episode referenced the Matrix and went back to doing... There was a lot of good stuff in this episode that referenced and went into the classic era. And one of the big ones is the time capsule later on. Also, the other thing that I felt was that I wish they hadn't gone back to Face the Raven. I know why they did, but I wish they hadn't, but we'll get around to that. That's something for later on. But anyway, Clara gets picked up by the Doctor and is taken to Gallifrey, and yeah, she's saved from the moment in time. So she's sort of saved in between heartbeats, as they put it. I'll come back to that later. And the Doctor disables the commander and shoots him, and he regenerates. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I felt it was a bit much. I mean, like you said, there was no stun set in, but you could have shot him in the kneecap. You know, you didn't have to kill him. But like the way the Doctor said was, sort of death on Gallifrey was the equivalent of man flu. So yeah, again, he could have kneecapped him. It wouldn't have made any difference. But there we are. Now the story goes, and they go down into the, I guess it was the Matrix, the cloister room or whatever, and they were down there, and there were things that had been trapped down there during the Time War and so on, and people who've tried to break into the archives before, and you had a Dalek that was saying exterminate me, because clearly it had been, that was tortured. That was a tortured Dalek. We also had Weeping Angels and Cybermen. I wish the Cybermen down there had been the sort of 70s version of the Cybermen, as opposed to the modern ones. That's just a personal preference. But I wish that they'd actually, considering that they pulled the trigger on everything else and rebuilt a classic style TARDIS console room, I wish that they had done that for the Cybermen as well, and maybe the Daleks as well. I think that would have been there's no reason why they couldn't have. So yeah, they're in the archives. He breaks into the Matrix and steals a TARDIS, and as I said, it's the classic TARDIS console room. I wish that they had lit it a little bit differently, because whilst that they have lit it similar to the way it was done in the shows in the past, the classic series Doctor Who was done in black and white. You couldn't tell what colour the lights were on the consoles or anything like that. They could have put a little bit more colour onto the panels just to make them pop a little bit, and they could have put a bit more dramatic lighting, because I have seen the console room lit slightly more dramatically and not so sterile, and it does look good. So I wish they'd have changed that up a little bit and not made it so bland. But it was still a hell of a job, and it still looked amazing, and I just thought it was a very, very nice reconstruction of that console room. Another thing that I liked in this was some of the dialogue and some of the lines, and there were some real beautiful lines in this episode. Like for instance, words are his weapons, when did they stop being ours? And Clara saying, nobody's promised tomorrow, but everyone's entitled to the past. And I thought that was a really real good line. That was one of those ones whereby it's like, yeah, okay, nobody can argue with that. Then the Doctor and Clara escape in this Type 40 to the end of time, and when they get there, they find me, and this is where the story gets a little bit shaky. I felt that the character of me shouldn't have been in this episode. I'm not sure anything was serviced by having this character in this episode. I don't think that she provided anything. I don't think that there was any benefit to having her there. I think that there was no comeuppance for her from the Doctor. There was no revenge, and there was no forgiveness. And those are two things that you don't want from the Doctor. You don't want his wrath, and you don't want his forgiveness. And she didn't have either, and so there was no real cycle for this character. It didn't finish. It didn't stop. It was just like the death of Clara had never happened, And I guess because the Doctor rescued him, maybe that's why he had just sort of let it slide a little bit. But to me, that was a bit like nah. If you were taken out of this episode, it wouldn't have made a difference. But the other thing about that was the fact that they mentioned the hybrid. And again, this part as well was another weak part of the episode. I felt that was a little bit of a letdown. They'd been referencing this hybrid and saying that it's probably part Time Lord and part Dalek, and maybe there was this whole... And they've been dealing with the hybrid all series. And then it gets to the hybrid, and it's really, come on. Oh, and maybe the hybrid is two people, and it's Clara and the Doctor. I mean, it was okay, but come on, they could have given us something there. They could have given us something a bit more than that. I thought it was a weak explanation, and it could have been handled a little bit better. I think if you're going to promise people stuff and you're going to have this whole setup, you've got to deliver, and it didn't on that ground. But it was still, story wise, I thought it was still wrapping up things and tying things up pretty well. And of course then we get to sort of the further into the end of the episode, whereby Clara and me go off, and Clara once again cheats death, and she goes off in her TARDIS with me, and the Doctor arrives back at his TARDIS, and it's written on the board, "Run, you clever boy, and be a doctor." And that's when he slips on his jacket and gets his new sonic screwdriver, which ejects out of the console, which was very reminiscent to me of R2-D2 with a lightsaber at the Sarlacc pit. I thought he didn't need that. He could have just walked down. I mean, it wouldn't have hurt anything if it had just popped out of the console and he had just picked it up. I thought that was a little bit cheesy. It was a lot cheesy. It wasn't even a little bit. It was a lot cheesy. But it wrapped up pretty well. But again, I do have a couple of issues. The story of Clara not having a heartbeat and not being able to live, and with her being inside the TARDIS with me, who is an immortal who can't die, to me that was very, very, very reminiscent of Torchwood, with the character of Owen and Captain Jack. Owen couldn't live, Captain Jack couldn't die. It was too similar. It was too similar. And again, the fact that she goes off and she parallels the Doctor. He's got two hearts, she hasn't got one. They're both on the run in TARDISes from Gallifrey. It was too much of a similarity, and to me personally, I think I would have preferred her to go back to face the Raven and to sort of say, look, you have to realise that you have saved me, but I have to face it now. I have to face my time. And but overall, what I think of this episode, well, this was a brilliant, mighty episode of Doctor Who. I felt like, for all the weaknesses that were there, they are minor gripes. Absolutely minor. This episode was fantastic. I just absolutely loved it to bits, and I feel like that this return to form for the past couple of weeks is each gradually getting better and better and better. I don't feel that this episode story-wise was as strong as last week's episode, but I do feel that it was a completely different tone of episode, and therefore it was much more of an adventurous show. We got to see a lot of stuff from the Gallifreyan side of things, from the Time Lords. I liked the Wraiths. I felt that they were very reminiscent of the Wraiths from the Tomb of Rassilon from the Five Doctors. Again, I loved the Gallifreyan ships. I just loved them. I wish they'd had a bit more of the Gallifreyan glyph on the outside of it. But hell, like I said, I want a model kit of one of those ships. They were stunning. And the other thing that I would say is that the only thing I really didn't like was the whole I can't find the chameleon circuit. So we're flying around the universe in a diner. But you know what, I forgive it because they are still learning how to work that particular Type 40. So I thought this was a very strong episode. I liked it a lot. I think it's gonna be a fan favourite for a long time. Out of 10, what would I give it? I'm gonna give this a solid 8 out of 10. Again, not as good as last week, but damn was it a lot of fun to watch. Anyway, that's what I think of this week's episode of Doctor Who and the series finale. Let me know in the comments down below what you've made of this episode. Also, feel free to like and comment on this video, or go over and join me on Google+. But until next time, which will be a couple of weeks' time for the Christmas episode, I'll see you later, guys.